From WLWT, this is Let's Talk Cincy, presented by Western and Southern Financial Group. Put our financial strength behind you.
The push for peace and safety after a violent night in Over the Rhine. City leaders responding by arresting 2 suspects within days of that shooting. In all, 9 people were shot, including one of the alleged shooters. He was shot by Cincinnati police officer Joe Shook, who is being credited with saving lives as a result of his actions. Cincinnati's mayor making it known that the violence is unacceptable in the Queen City. The city announced changes to the area in light of that shooting, including more officers patrolling at night and no parking on weekend evenings. Hello, everyone. I'm Curtis Fuller, and welcome to Let's Talk Cincy. With me today to talk about the OTR situation and much more is the mayor of Cincinnati, Aftab Pureval. And thank you very much for joining me.
It's always a pleasure, Curtis. Thanks for having me.
So let's go right to Over the Rhine. We've been talking about it really the past few weeks. Take me into your mind when you saw what had happened. 4
mass shootings in our region this past year. It's completely and absolutely unacceptable. And that's what's going through my mind at 1:40 in the morning when I get the call, through the morning as police and our administration work through the night to make sure, first and foremost, that we apprehend the shooters. And as you mentioned, just days, really days after the shooting, our CPD and our homicide division proved why they're the best in the country by apprehending and now prosecuting those shooters. Look, it's completely unacceptable, and we've taken immediate action to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
I could sense the frustration that you were expressing and others expressed during that first news conference. It really is frustrating for everyone.
Well, it's incredibly frustrating because of the brazenness of the shooting. I mean, the shooter was standing feet away from a police cruiser and just feet away from Officer Shook when the shots rang out. Thankfully, Officer Shook was there, acted heroically in order to make sure that more people weren't injured, and thankfully, no one died, but it's really just by the grace of God that happened. We have to make sure we're doing everything possible, including supporting our law enforcement. But law enforcement will tell you that alone won't solve the problem. We have to have community interventions at both the education and economic level in order to interrupt this violence significantly. And I'm so proud of our administration for having a comprehensive plan.
Yeah, and you also talk about the number of guns just are out on the street now. Again, that's one of those issues. It's hard to get your hands around. You know?
Curtis, gun violence in our community has evolved and changed. It's not the gun violence of the old, which was primarily concentrated around the drug trade. The 2 factors that are really contributing to the violence these days is, number one, the overwhelming universal accessibility of guns. I was with a roundtable of some children, some teenagers, and I asked, how easy is it to get a gun? And they said, I can make 1 call and have a gun in 2 hours.
1 call?
1 call.
Wow.
I mean, there's more guns than people in our community right now. And the second is our collective inability to resolve differences peacefully. What used to end in a fist fight now ends in a gunfight. That's what happened on Main Street. That's what happened in Oakley, in the Target parking lot. That's what happened in Hyde Park, in the Kroger parking lot. People getting into arguments and then reaching for their guns. It's a challenge that is not unique to Cincinnati. It's going on across the country. And I know it doesn't feel like it. And I'm certainly not saying this as any kind of defense, but the context is helpful here. By the numbers, our violent crime is actually a little bit lower and on par with our previous year. But 4 mass shootings in our region this year is completely unacceptable, and we all have to work hard in order to prevent that moving forward.
You were talking about this because you went to Washington. You went to the White House to discuss this. So you were talking about some initiatives the city is putting in place even before Over the Rhine.
Yeah, so the City Managers Advisory Group, one of the really the hallmarks, the institutions of our landmark collaborative agreement has really been investigating and offering solutions to gun violence, particularly gun violence where children are the victims and children are the perpetrators. They focused a lot on mental health, making sure that our community leaders have the training and the tools necessary to identify when mental health is at a crisis, so we can intervene before violence rings out. We're also doing what's called Boots on the Ground and the Safe and Clean Fund, 2 grant opportunities that puts money in the hands of people in the community already doing the work of violence interventions so that they can scale up. And of course, we're supporting our law enforcement in a really big way.
I mentioned at the top about those changes that are coming to Over the Rhine, already in place now. We're going to talk a little bit more about that once we come back. Interesting changes, more police patrolling, and some other things. Back in a moment. Welcome back, everyone. Here with me is someone who really needs no introduction, the mayor of Cincinnati, Aftab Pureval. We're talking obviously about what took place in Over the Rhine. Immediately, you guys decided we need changes down in Over the Rhine in particular, and this may even go to other neighborhoods, but talk about some of those changes that went into effect immediately.
Well, look, a mass shooting can't happen again in our city, and we're going to do everything we possibly can to prevent that from happening again. And of course, we're focused on Main Street in order to interrupt the violence there. We had a roundtable with residents and business leaders. On Monday, we had another roundtable later. I know this airs on Saturday, but later today I'm having another roundtable with residents. Look, we acted quickly with some short-term interventions, like closing down the street earlier, having no parking, so there's better line of sight for our police officers, increasing our police presence, which had already been increased the previous weeks. So we're testing it. We're seeing what's working, getting community feedback. That strategy will evolve and change over time as we get better data about what's being successful and what has more community support. But the people of Cincinnati can rest assured that our entire city government, not just CPD, but DPS, fire, health department, we're all focused on preventing this kind of violence, not just in Main Street, but across our city.
Yes, some pushback from business owners, and I assume residents too,
Yep.
About the barricades of sorts. And that's what you're saying, you're just testing out various ideas.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we heard from business owners and from residents there was the kind of ad hoc, impromptu, large block parties that sometimes got out of control, that sometimes had some illicit and illegal behavior going on. And so we're thinking of creative solutions and creative interventions that, frankly, that strike the right balance between maintaining an entertainment district on Main Street, but also maintaining the safety. A mass shooting simply cannot happen again, period.
We show in some of the video, you actually down on the banks, and I know that you went down to Over the Rhine that first weekend of some of those changes.
Yeah, both last Friday and Saturday night, I was at the banks and on Main Street from 11 p.m. to roughly about 2 a.m. I'm turning 40 in a couple weeks, so 2 a.m. looks a lot different than it used to. I've got a 4-month-old at home, so usually I'm at home feeding him at that time. But I wanted to see for myself, how are these interventions working? I had while I was on the street, got a lot of feedback from folks, some who had been enjoying themselves and some who had a lot to tell me. But that's how I have the best data possible, by being in the community, by realizing how this is affecting business owners, how this is affecting residents, and we will change and adapt as we get more data.
What did you hear from some of the police on the street that night?
They were, I think, really grateful for the support that the city administration has provided them, and also the council. Look, the numbers for our police complement aren't what they need to be, and this is the first council that has really taken immediate action. The most recruit classes and recruits since 1999 funded by this council. We funded overtime pay going into the summer because we anticipated that our numbers would increase from a violent crime perspective. We're increasing those numbers now that we're in the middle and tail end of our summer. And you know, the support that this council has provided the police is really extraordinary. But again, you know, these interventions are not specific to police. This council has also made an extraordinary investment in youth jobs because the youth violence, unfortunately, is completely unacceptable. We're now spending $2.4 million, an increase of $1 million to our youth jobs program. And instead of just summer seasonal work, now it's year-long and it's focused on careers, not just jobs.
You touched on the police. We're going to talk a little bit more about those recruit classes and the numbers reference to police when we come back. Welcome back. The push for more police has been resurrected. This time, the head of the Cincinnati FOP is warning the shortage is approaching crisis level. City leaders don't see it that way, but they admit the numbers are significantly lower than they should be. One of the most significant numbers is 402. Now, you don't hear much reference to that, but that's how many officers respond to calls for service right here in our city. And when you factor in 3 shifts, off days, sick days, and vacation, that number becomes a big rank and file concern. We have more now from John London.
One of the most significant numbers is 402. You don't hear a lot of talk about it, but that's how many officers respond to calls for service in the city of Cincinnati. And when you factor in 3 shifts, off days, sick days, and vacation, that number becomes a big rank and file concern. The question of precisely how many police officers Cincinnati needs is decades old, but based on population, the city agreed 1,059 is about right. After another retirement today, the city now has 951 officers, 108 below the agreed-upon complement.
We don't have enough policemen.
FOP President Dan Hills calls it a crisis, and the pool of applicants to be part of the city's finest is far from what it used to be. Former officer and current lawmaker Scotty Johnson was one of 6,000 who took the test back in 1986. Hills was one of 5,000 in 1987. Today, roughly 500 apply, and the goal of 53 recruits fell way short.
They were told they could go up to 60 if they found 60 good applicants. They ended up with, I think, about 38, but several have dropped out. So right now we're at 34.
City leaders confirm the FOP numbers, but insist there's no crisis, even though they've seen 41 officers breeze into retirement so far this year. If that rate continues, they could be flirting with 900 before new recruits are ready.
We could be, absolutely, yeah. And so we are doing what we can.
They're working on keeping high school cadets in the pipeline. Those classes end at age 18. And by state law, you must be 21 to be an officer. The rank and file sees inflation eating away at longevity pay and overtime. And more veteran officers are eyeing retirement at a time when recruiting is not keeping pace.
And it's incumbent upon the city of Cincinnati to retain as many of these people as they can, start to build this number back up. Let's start heading back to here so we can keep our streets safe.
Sergeant Dan Hills calling for retention bonuses. City Manager John Kurp noted from last Christmas through the end of next year, there will be 126 new officers, new recruits, which he calls unprecedented in the city's history. Kurp said it's critically important to close the gap, and he welcomed the FOP for raising the awareness level on this issue. At District 1, John London, WLWT News 5.
So you heard Dan Hills talk about this retention bonus. He calls it a crisis. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, there's no doubt that we have a challenge when it comes to officer staffing, and that's why this council acted immediately. As I said in the previous segment, the most recruit classes and recruits funded by the mayor and the city council since 1999. We walked into this situation, but immediately we took action in order to try to start resolving it with 126 new folks coming on to the ranks. Now, this is going to take time in order to address, but people can rest assured that we took action immediately. It was the top priority in our most recent budget that passed 9-0, and we're all hand in hand, and we agree that we need to continue to increase those numbers.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, so much swirls around the police. When you're talking to some of those teenagers, do you sense that they want to go into policing?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there's no doubt that there's a challenge on both ends of the career. We have a historic number of folks who are retiring, and our recruit classes are not what they were from a numbers perspective in previous years. But CPD has a strong and thriving cadet program that trains young people in the joys, the responsibilities, and the challenges of being a police officer. Public safety jobs, no doubt, are challenging, but they're incredibly fulfilling. And most importantly, they are needed right now more than ever, particularly in Cincinnati. So that's why we're looking at resurrecting, in partnership with the Superintendent Ironetta Wright of CPS, with Chief Washington and with Chief Thigi, the Public Safety Academy. That's actually in our charter. But we're working already to resurrect that program, to have a strong pipeline of students who graduate from CPS high schools straight into police and fire to address some of these issues.
If ever we realize the significance and the importance of policing, we've seen that the past month or so, the incident in Madisonville, someone points a gun at a police officer. Sadly, she had to shoot and kill him.
Yeah.
And then this incident in Over the Rhine. But the fact that they were there, you know, Officer Shook was about 55 feet away, I think, and took one shot and hit. So again, the importance of those officers on the street.
Our police department is extraordinary. We're the best in the country, and we're a model, given our collaborative agreement of problem-solving oriented policing. The fact that our homicide department was able to apprehend and now prosecute those shooters within days of a mass shooting happening gives you all the evidence that you need that we have the best and the bravest protecting and serving us every day. We are a true partner with our Cincinnati Police Department, and we're looking at not just resting on our laurels, but continuing to be a national model. So this council and I have pushed innovative solutions like sending mental health unarmed responders to homelessness and addiction issues to free up, for those 911 calls, to free up our police officers to focus on these shootings and this violent crime.
Just briefly before we go to break, you mentioned the interim police chief, Chief Thigi. How are you coming along on that search for a new chief?
I understand we're coming along well. It's the city manager's decision, but what will precipitate the city manager to pick a police chief is my decision on the city manager. And I'm expecting to put a name, a single name for council to vote up or down on by the end of this month or the very first week in September. So happening imminently.
All right. We're going to take a break. We're going to shift gears a little bit on topic. Of course, health issues still alarming throughout the nation and here in our area. We'll be back in a moment. Always good to sit down with the mayor and just talk about a few issues. Obviously, we touched on the Over the Rhine situation. I want to talk health now because COVID numbers still a concern and monkeypox also an issue. What's our COVID status right now here?
Yeah, the CDC, based on our COVID numbers, continues to strongly recommend that people mask indoors, that they keep their social distance, and that's what we're recommending as well. But look, Curtis, this is now 2 years into this, more than 2 years into this. This is now a pandemic of the unvaccinated. If you are vaccinated, if you are boosted, you can still get COVID, but most importantly, you are very, very unlikely to be hospitalized and die. What we saw in January with the Omicron surge was very concerning because of our hospital capacity. It pushed our hospital capacity to the very brink. We had to call in the Ohio National Guard to help us with our testing sites and to help us with staffing some of our hospitals. We need to avoid getting to that point again, and the only way we do that is by fighting against the misinformation that's out there, encouraging folks to continue to get that vaccine, continue to get boosted, because it will save your life and it will save the lives of people around you.
And I think you've even recommended to city workers inside, you recommended, not mandated, that they wear a mask.
We do recommend it, but you know, just as we talked about the shootings and our level of frustration, also the level of frustration is high for folks who refuse to get vaccinated, because they're not only putting themselves at risk, they're putting all of us at risk. And for those of us who are vaccinated, we continue to have to appeal to the lowest common denominator by wearing masks and social distancing, because they refuse to take personal responsibility. So, you know, unfortunately, we're gonna have to continue to muddle through, because that last however many percent refuses to get the vaccine.
Monkeypox, we touch on that. It's not a major issue here in our city, in this county, but the CDC has put out some guidelines relative to that.
Yeah, look, monkeypox is something we're keeping our eye on, and also something that we have taken immediate action on, particularly for communities, LGBTQIA communities, specifically men who have sex with men, who are most at risk. We, with the leadership of Reggie Harris, and this was a regional partnership, Councilmember Reggie Harris, in partnership with Commissioner Denise Driehaus with the Hamilton County Commission, kind of pooled our resources, pooled our vaccines, and sent vaccines directly to that community who is most at risk. It's important to understand the differences between monkeypox and between COVID. Our current understanding of monkeypox is that it is less contagious because it is not airborne the way that COVID is. You have to have physical contact with someone with an open sore who has monkeypox. So it's harder to get than it is to get COVID. Nevertheless, though, there's a state of emergency in California, a state of emergency in New York. We've seen a relatively large outbreak in Columbus. So it's only a matter of time for our numbers to start to go up. But right now, only a handful of people have been infected with monkeypox in Cincinnati, and we have it under control.
All right. Well, it's always good. You're always welcome here. It's always good to talk to you. We touched on a lot of issues today, and that's all the time we have for the program today. Our thanks to Mayor Aftab Pureval for joining us. I'm Curtis Fuller. I'll see you next time for another edition of Let's Talk Cincy. Thank you.
Nice job.